The fire is already burning. Its glow flickers softly against the night, each crackle rising like an old story being told once more. You sit close, wrapped in warmth, listening to the rhythm of flame and wind. Tonight, we journey far from the present, across time and sea, into the quiet heart of the Viking Age. This is not the tale of battles or raids, but of something far older, far more human. The way the Vikings said goodbye. Their funeral rites, wrapped in fire, song, and silence, were not only ceremonies of death, but also whispers of eternity. So, close your eyes if you wish. Let the sound of the fire guide you, and let us begin together. By the shorelines of the north, the fire is already burning. Its glow flickers softly against the night, each crackle rising like an old story being told once more. You sit close, wrapped in warmth, listening to the rhythm of flame and wind. Tonight, we journey far from the present, across time and sea, into the quiet heart of the Viking Age. This is not the tale of battles or raids, nor the storm of steel that many think of when they hear the word Viking. Instead, it is a slower story, gentler, and yet filled with meaning. It is about the way they said farewell to their own. The funeral rites of the Norse were not merely acts of parting. They were bridges, bridges of fire, bridges of memory, and bridges of song, between the world of the living and the mysteries that lay beyond. Close your eyes if you wish, or let them rest on the fire before you. Allow the world around you to fade. In its place, imagine the northern seas, the curling fjords, the distant mountains rising like giants asleep beneath the stars. Here, in this rugged land, the Vikings carved out their lives. And here, too, they learned how to honor death. Picture the silence of a Scandinavian night. The waves move slowly against the rocks, the sky painted with pale streaks of aurora. Villages rest in the hollow of valleys, their longhouses glowing with the faint orange of hearth fires. In one of these villages, a gathering has begun. A funeral, though somber, is not only a time of sorrow. For the Vikings, it is also a time of reverence, of connection, of story. But before we step deeper into their customs, let us pause by the fire a little longer. Fires were the heart of Viking life. To them, fire was warmth in bitter winters. It was the light that pushed back the endless night. It was also the sacred element of transformation, the flame that cooked their food, forged their iron, and carried their dead toward the heavens. When we speak of Viking funerals, we are speaking of fire not merely as destruction, but as passage. The fire consumed the body, yes, but in doing so, it set the spirit free. The Vikings believed the soul was never truly gone. It traveled beyond to halls and realms shaped by fate. Some would find their way to Valhalla, the hall of the slain, where warriors dined with the gods. Others would walk quieter paths, to the meadows of Fólkvangr or the hidden depths of hell. Whatever the destination, fire was the vessel that carried them there. And so the first chapter of this story begins here with you, listening to the fire, as the Vikings themselves once did. Imagine the hush of villagers gathered along the shore, cloaked against the northern chill. A ship waits upon the water, its carved prow rising like a beast watching the stars. Torches flicker in the hands of mourners, their flames small and fragile against the vast night. At the heart of it all rests the body of the departed, surrounded by offerings, treasures, tools, sometimes even animals, all placed carefully to serve them in the world to come. The air is thick with quiet reverence. A skald, a poet, steps forward. His voice, steady yet sorrowful, begins to weave the life of the one they honor. He tells of battles fought, of journeys made, of family ties that bind across generations. His words drift into the firelight, carrying memory into the night sky. Each phrase is more than remembrance. It is invocation, a call to the gods to witness the soul's passage. The fire is lit. At first, it is only a small flame licking at the wood. Then it grows, crackling, roaring, climbing higher into the darkness. The gathered mourners watch in silence. Some whisper prayers, some weep softly, others simply stand unmoving, their eyes fixed on the dance of fire that consumes and transforms. For them, this moment is not only farewell, it is a sacred crossing. As the flames rise, so too does the smoke. And here lies the most beautiful belief. that smoke carried the soul upward into the realms beyond. The higher the fire climbed, the swifter the soul ascended. To the Vikings, this was not the end, but the beginning of another journey, unseen but deeply felt. By the fire tonight, you too may feel a sense of that same timeless passage. Death, after all, is the one story all people share. The Vikings met it with courage and with ritual, binding their grief into ceremonies that soothed the living even as they honored the dead. Their funeral rites were not only for the departed, they were for those left behind, a way of weaving comfort into sorrow. Now, as you listen to the steady rhythm of the fire beside you, allow yourself to be carried by their story. Each flame is a memory. Each spark is a journey. Each ember is a reminder that even endings glow with light. This is where we begin, not in fear, not in darkness, but in the warm glow of fire. In the chapters to come, we will walk further into their world. We will explore their beliefs, their songs, their gatherings, and the many ways they turned farewell into ritual. But for now, rest here at the fire's edge. Let its warmth steady your thoughts. Let its light guide your breathing. And as the Vikings once whispered to the flames, we too can whisper. This is not the end, it is the beginning. The fire still burns steady and low. Its warmth holds you close, while beyond the circle of its glow, the night stretches vast and endless. You hear the wind as it brushes past, carrying with it the scent of salt and pine, as though we have drifted together into the far north. It is here, along the rugged shores of Scandinavia, that the Viking story begins. The northern lands are harsh, but they are also beautiful. Imagine standing at the edge of a fjord, its dark waters calm and deep, the cliffs rising sheer on either side like guardians of stone. The sea is cold, yet it is alive, alive with fish, alive with birds, alive with the restless pull that forever draws the Norse people outward. To the Vikings, the sea was not a barrier, it was a road of adventure, of trade, of conquest, and as we will come to see, even a road to the afterlife. The land itself was a teacher. Winters were long, stretching like an endless hush across fields and forests. Summers, though brief, were golden and vibrant, bursting with life and growth. To live here was to live with rhythm, the rhythm of the seasons, of storm and calm, of plenty and scarcity. The people who called these shores home learned resilience, patience, and above all, respect for the powers that lay beyond their control. Close your eyes for a moment and picture the world they knew. Small clusters of wooden houses nestled in valleys, their roofs steep and strong against the weight of snow. Smoke curls from chimneys, carrying the scent of pine wood and roasting meat. Children play near streams and meadows, their laughter sharp and bright against the quiet landscape. In the distance, farmers worked the soil, their oxen pulling wooden plows through the stubborn earth. Life was simple, yet never easy. The Vikings were farmers and fishermen, herders and hunters, craftsmen and poets. Their days were filled with labor, yet their minds were alive with stories, myths of gods who shaped the world, of giants who threatened it, and of fates that no one could escape. Around every hearth fire, these tales were told, binding families together and keeping memory alive. But the sea always waited. The longships, sleek and strong, rested on the shores, ready to carry men across waters both known and unknown. These ships were more than tools. They were symbols of freedom, of daring, of the Viking spirit itself. Built from oak and pine, stitched with iron nails and tarred to resist the waves, they seemed to breathe with the men who sailed them. And in death, these ships would become something even greater, vessels of eternity. Yet before we reach that part of their story, let us remain with the living for a little while longer. The northern shores shaped the very soul of the Viking people. When they looked at the sea, they saw possibility. When they looked at the mountains, they saw endurance. And when they looked at the sky, whether filled with stars, storm, or northern lights, they saw the hand of the divine. The Norse gods were everywhere. Odin, the All-Father, watched with his single wise eye. Thor, with his hammer, guarded against chaos. Freyr and Freyr brought fertility and abundance. Even Loki, the trickster, wove mischief into the fabric of their days. To the Vikings, the divine was not distant. It was present, in thunder, in harvest, in death, and in fire. This closeness gave their rituals power. When they lit a funeral pyre, they believed the gods could see, could hear, and could receive what the smoke carried. Now imagine standing on one of those shores as evening falls. The sun sinks low, scattering gold across the waves. The gulls wheel above, their cries sharp against the hush of dusk. A fisherman hauls in his nets, heavy with the day's catch. Children chase each other through the grass, their laughter fading as the shadows grow long. Soon families gather inside their halls, where firelight flickers on carved beams and the scent of stew fills the air. This was daily life, ordinary yet woven with quiet beauty. And yet always death lingered nearby, in lands where winters could be merciless, where the sea could turn suddenly violent, where sickness could strike without warning. The Vikings understood that life was fragile. To live was to walk hand in hand with the knowledge of mortality. This awareness did not make them fearful. Instead, it made them reverent. They sought to honor life by preparing for death, and to honor death by celebrating life. The northern shores remind us of this balance. Harshness and beauty, danger and safety, life and death, all existed side by side. And so when a Viking funeral took place, it was not simply a moment of mourning. It was a moment that brought together everything they understood about the world: the sea as passage, the fire as transformation, the gods as witnesses, and the people as keepers of memory. The fire here beside us is the same fire they once tended. Its glow, its warmth, its endless cycle of consuming and renewing was as familiar to them as it is to you now. When the Vikings gathered at the edge of their shores to say farewell, they trusted the flames to do what words alone could not. They trusted the fire to guide the soul. So tonight, as you sit here listening, let your breath move gently in rhythm with the fire. Inhale as the flame rises. Exhale as the embers fall. The northern shores stretch wide around us, their beauty unfolding in the stillness of night. And in that stillness, the story of Viking funeral rites slowly begins to take shape. The sea is before us, endless and dark. The land is behind us, firm and steady. Between the two, the Vikings lived their lives, and between the two, they crossed from this world into the next. The northern shores held them in life, and on these same shores, they lit their final fires. And so our journey continues, not with haste, not with urgency, but with the slow rhythm of waves and flame. In the next chapter, we will step deeper into their beliefs about life and death, and see how these shaped every farewell they gave. But for now, remain by the shore. Listen to the sea. Feel the fire. Rest in the quiet of the northern night. The fire breathes softly, as though it too remembers. In its glow, the line between life and death becomes less sharp, less fearful, more like the slow turning of a wheel. For the Vikings, that wheel was always in motion. To be born was to step into its circle. To live was to walk within it. And to die was to step beyond, into a place both feared and embraced. Life in the Viking world was hard, and because it was hard, it was precious. Each day carried weight. Children grew up quickly, learning to fish, to farm, to gather, and to help. Women held the hearth, tended the family, managed the farm when men sailed. Men worked the land, hunted, built, and when the call came, they traveled to fight or trade. But all were bound together, not only by kinship, but by the quiet understanding that life was fragile. A harsh winter could claim the weak. A storm at sea could swallow the strongest of men. A fever, creeping through the longhouses, could silence voices overnight. Death was not a stranger, it was a constant guest. And yet, because it was always present, the Vikings did not treat it as something alien. They prepared for it, they spoke of it, they wove it into their stories and songs. Imagine sitting in a Viking hall on a long winter's night. The wind howls outside, snow piling high against the wooden walls. Inside, the hearth burns bright. Families gather close, cloaked in furs, their faces glowing in the firelight. A Skald clears his throat, and his voice begins to rise, telling of Odin's hall, of Thor's battles, of the Norns weaving fate at the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree. The children listen wide-eyed. The elders nod with knowing. These stories remind them life is fleeting, but life is also part of something vast, something eternal. At the heart of Viking belief lay the idea that fate was unshakable. The Norns, the weavers of destiny, spun the threads of every life, binding even the gods to the pattern. No man or woman could escape what was woven for them. Death would come when it was fated to come, whether in old age beside the hearth, or on the battlefield beneath the clash of steel. What mattered was not avoiding death, but meeting it with honor. Honor, to the Vikings, was everything. To die well was to live on in memory. A life remembered was a life that never truly ended. This is why funeral rites were so important. They were the bridge between a life lived and a life remembered. Without them, the circle would feel broken. With them, the circle remained whole. Consider for a moment how different this view feels from much of the modern world. Today, many shy away from speaking of death, but the Vikings held it close, as one holds a shadow that always follows. They sang of it, feasted in its presence, and crafted rituals that gave it meaning. By doing so, they softened its edge. Death became not only an ending, but a passage into story, into song, into eternity. And yet there was not one single path after death. The Norse believed in many destinations, shaped by who you were, how you lived, and sometimes simply by fate. Warriors who died bravely might be taken to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where endless feasting and training prepared them for the final battle at the end of time. Others might go to Fólkvangr, the field of the goddess Freyja, equally honored and equally peaceful. Those who died less gloriously might walk quieter roads, to Hel, a realm not of torment, but of stillness and rest, ruled by the goddess Hel herself. In all these visions, death was not nothingness. It was simply another realm, another way of being. Now, picture again the fire beside you. Its flames rise and fall, but the embers beneath glow steady and bright. So too was the Viking view of life and death. The flame might vanish, but the ember remained, hidden yet alive, waiting to glow again. Funeral fires were kindled not only to burn the body, but to release the ember of the soul, sending it onward. This deep awareness of mortality shaped their lives. To live each day with death in mind was not morbid. It was a call to live fully, bravely, and with purpose. Farmers plowed their fields not only for themselves, but for the children who would inherit them. Warriors took up the sword knowing that their courage might one day be remembered in song. Mothers and fathers raised their children with patience, knowing each life was a fragile gift from the gods. And so when death came, the community gathered. No one was left to pass alone. The living surrounded the departed with song, with fire, with offerings of love. The rituals were not only for the one who had died, they were for the living as well. A reminder that grief was shared, that memory endured, and that death was not an end, but a transformation. In this way, life and death among the Vikings were never far apart. They were threads of the same cloth, woven together by story, by ritual, and by flame. Each life was a spark, each death a smoke rising into the heavens, carrying the soul onward. The fire before you hums softly. Its warmth reaches your skin, its glow rests gently in your eyes. As you breathe with it, you may feel what the Vikings once felt, that life is fleeting, that death is certain, and that within this truth lies a quiet kind of peace. So let the fire hold you, as it once held them. Rest in the balance of life and death, knowing that both are part of the same eternal circle. And as we move forward, let us carry this understanding with us, deeper into their rituals, their beliefs, and their timeless ways of saying farewell. The fire whispers still, its light has softened, casting long shadows that stretch into the night. As you sit with its glow, let your thoughts drift gently toward what lies beyond life itself, the places the Vikings believed awaited the soul after death. For the Norse, the afterlife was not one single destination. It was many. Just as rivers split and flow in different directions, so too did the soul have many possible journeys. Where you went depended on fate, on how you lived, and on how you died. To the Vikings, death was not silence. Death was a call, an invitation from realms unseen. Perhaps the most famous of these realms was Valhalla, the the Hall of the Slain. Picture it now, rising like a golden fortress beneath the endless northern sky. Its roof was said to be thatched with shields, its walls spears, its benches crowded with warriors. Inside, the air was filled with laughter, the clang of weapons, and the endless feasting of those chosen by Odin himself. Here, the bravest of warriors fought by day and feasted by night, preparing for Ragnarok, the final battle at the end of time. To fall in battle was to receive the call to Valhalla, carried by the Valkyries, the shining maidens of Odin. But not all souls longed for war. Another hall awaited them, Fólkvangr, the field of the goddess Freyja. Unlike the noise of Valhalla, Fólkvangr was quieter, gentler, filled with peace and beauty. Freyja was a goddess of love and fertility, but also of death, and she chose many of the fallen to dwell with her. To rest in her meadows was to find calm after struggle, light after shadow. There were other destinations too. Hell, the realm ruled by the goddess of the same name, was a place of stillness. Despite later stories that turned it into something grim, to the Vikings hell was not a place of torment. It was simply where many souls went. Those who died of sickness, of old age, or in ways less glorious than battle. Its halls were cold, its fields shadowed, yet it was not a place of punishment. It was another kind of rest, another kind of home. Some souls were believed to linger close to the living, bound to burial mounds or sacred sites. Ancestors were honored, their spirits respected, for they were thought to watch over their kin. A Viking might whisper to the earth where his father lay, or leave offerings on a grave to keep the bond alive. In this way, the dead were never truly gone. They remained part of the family, part of the land. The journey of the soul was not only about destination, it was also about transformation. The Vikings believed that fire, that sacred element, released the spirit from the body and carried it upward. Smoke was a path, a bridge between worlds. When they lit the pyre, they were not only saying farewell, they were guiding the soul, helping it rise into the unseen. Imagine standing by one of those pyres, the flames roaring against the dark sky. The smoke climbs higher, curling into the stars. Each wisp is a thread, a pathway, a call answered by the afterlife itself. The mourners watch in silence, their hearts heavy, their eyes fixed on the rising trail of fire. They believe, with all the certainty of faith, that the soul is on its way, that the call has been heard. The Norse saw death not as an end, but as a continuation, a crossing of thresholds. Life was one hall, the afterlife another. And just as one leaves the warmth of a room to step into the night, so too did the soul leave the body to step into another realm. This belief gave them strength. It gave them courage in the face of danger and comfort in the face of grief. Think now of how different these destinations were. Valhalla, bright and full of sound. Fólkvangr, peaceful and green. Hell, shadowed and still. The mound, where ancestors lingered close. Each one offered something distinct, yet each one was a continuation of the same journey. To the Vikings, no death was meaningless, no life forgotten. Every path had a place, and so their funerals were crafted with care, for to honor the dead was to guide the living. The rituals reminded the mourners that the soul was not lost, but merely called away. When they wept, they also sang. When they mourned, they also feasted. When they lit the fire, they also trusted the smoke to rise. It was grief and hope, sorrow and faith, bound together in flame. Here by our fire you can almost feel that same assurance. The glow before you is a small echo of the great pyres that once blazed across northern shores. Each spark is a reminder that the call of the afterlife was never silence. It was always presence, always continuation, always the promise of somewhere beyond. The Vikings lived their lives knowing that at any moment the call might come. They did not hide from it. They faced it, embraced it, and prepared for it. And when it came, they trusted their people, their gods, and their fire to guide them onward. So rest now in this thought that death, though final in one sense, is only another beginning in another. That life, though fleeting, is always carried forward in memory, in story, in flame. This was the heart of Viking belief. The call of the afterlife was not to darkness, but to journey. As the fire crackles, as your breath slows, Let that journey settle within you. We have only begun to glimpse their world. Soon we will step deeper into the first flames of farewell, where ritual begins, and the soul's passage is marked by sacred fire. But for now, let the fire's glow guide you into rest. Let the call of the afterlife whisper softly in your ear, not as an end, but as a continuation, an eternal road stretching gently into the unknown. The fire beside us burns steadily, as it always has. Yet tonight, let us imagine another fire, one kindled not for warmth, not for cooking, but for farewell. For the Vikings, the first flames of a funeral pyre were more than sparks. They were the beginning of a sacred passage, the moment when the living and the dead stood closest to one another. When a member of the community died, the Vikings did not rush. Death required patience, care, and ritual. The body was tended first with reverence. It was washed, clothed, and prepared. Sometimes it was dressed in fine garments, with weapons or jewelry placed close at hand. Other times the body was laid more simply, wrapped in cloth. What mattered most was intention, that each step was done with honor, with love, with the understanding that this was not only a farewell, but a preparation for a journey. In some villages, the body might be placed in a small chamber, a house for the dead, where relatives could come and pay their respects. In others, the body was set upon the ship, waiting for the day of the ceremony, no matter the form. There was always the same awareness that the soul lingered near, watching, listening, waiting to be carried forward. Imagine the village as the day of farewell approaches. Torches are readied, wood is stacked, offerings are gathered. Neighbors come from near and far, each bringing something: a carved cup, a woven cloth, a piece of food or drink for the feast to come. The whole community joins, for death belongs not only to family, but to all. At the center of it all is the firewood. Carefully arranged, logs are stacked high, dried branches laid to catch the first spark. The pyre is built strong, able to carry both the weight of the body and the weight of all the offerings placed with it. Every piece of wood is chosen with care, for it is more than fuel. It is the bridge between worlds. And then comes the body, carried with solemn steps. Those who love the departed walk slowly, their faces calm but heavy with meaning. They lay the body upon the pyre, surrounded by belongings, sometimes a sword, sometimes a shield, sometimes only a small keepsake. These were not simply possessions. They were companions for the journey ahead, tokens of a life lived and gifts for the afterlife. At this moment, before the fire is lit, silence often falls. The mourners gather close, forming a circle. Some weep quietly. Others close their eyes in prayer. A skald might step forward, his voice rising in slow, measured rhythm, recounting the deeds of the one they honor. He speaks of battles fought, fields tilled, children raised, voyages made. His words are not for the living alone. They are for the dead as well, carried upward, carried onward. Then, at last, the torch is brought forward. The flame trembles in the wind, a small, fragile light. The one chosen, perhaps a son, perhaps a brother, perhaps a friend, touches the torch to the wood. Smoke curls upward. A spark catches. And then, slowly, the pyre awakens. The first flames rise gently, licking at the edges of bark and branch. They crackle softly, as though whispering a welcome. The mourners watch in silence, their faces glowing in the light. For them, this is the most sacred moment, the beginning of the soul's release. The body rests still, but the fire has begun its work. As the flames grow stronger, so too does the sense of passage. The Vikings believed the fire did more than consume. It transformed. Flesh returned to ash, and soul returned to sky. The smoke rose upward, carrying with it the spirit, the prayers, and the memory of the one who had died. Each wisp of smoke was a path. Each spark was a step along the way. Sometimes the funeral was grand. A great ship might be set ablaze, filled with treasures, its flames reflecting upon the waves as it drifted into the night. Other times, it was simpler. A mound of wood upon the land, burning steadily until all was ash. Yet whether great or small, the meaning was always the same. The fire was the first farewell, the moment the living entrusted the dead to the gods. Picture the scene now, the northern night deep and silent, the pyre blazing bright. Faces glow in the firelight, eyes fixed upon the flames. The air smells of smoke and pine, of earth and salt. The sea nearby reflects the fire's glow, a mirror of the passage from one realm to another. Above, the stars shine, watching, listening, receiving. As the fire consumes, the mourners begin to sing. Low voices rise into the night, a chant, a hymn, a song that binds grief and hope together. The rhythm of the song echoes the rhythm of the flames. Each note carries the memory of the departed, lifting it higher, weaving it into the night sky. The first flames become many, the song becomes steady, and the passage becomes certain. In this way, the Vikings marked their farewells, not with silence alone, not with fear, but with fire. Fire was the sacred companion, the messenger, the guide. To watch the flames was to trust that the soul was carried onward. To feel the warmth was to know that even in death there was light. Here by our own fire, you too may feel the quiet beauty of this ritual. The crackle, the glow, the rising smoke, they are not only of wood and flame, they are echoes of the countless farewells that once burned upon northern shores. Each one was a bridge, each one a passage, each one the first step into eternity. So rest in this thought that the first flames of farewell were never only endings, they were beginnings too. For the Vikings, to light the pyre was to trust the fire, to release with love, and to believe in the journey beyond. And as our story continues, we will step into the heart of that journey, the ritual of the ship, the vessel that carried not only warriors across seas, but souls across the vast waters of eternity. The fire hums quietly, steady as breath. Tonight, we follow its glow toward one of the most enduring images of the Viking world, the funeral ship. To the Vikings, ships were more than wood and sail. They were life itself, tools of travel, of trade, of war, and of story. And when death came, the ship became something greater still, a vessel of eternity. The northern seas were the heartbeat of Viking life. They fished upon them, fought upon them, and followed them into the unknown. The ship was the link between villages, between lands, between worlds. It was only natural that the same ships that carried men through life should also carry them into death. When a person of honor died, whether a chieftain, a warrior, or someone beloved, the ship might be chosen as their final resting place. Sometimes it was a real ship, pulled from the water and drawn onto land. Sometimes it was a smaller vessel, built solely for the ceremony. And in some burials, instead of a ship itself, a grave was shaped like one, stones laid out in the form of a vessel, so that even in earth, the soul would seem to rest upon the sea. Imagine the scene as the ritual begins. The ship rests upon the shore, its prow carved with the fierce face of a beast, its hull gleaming with tar and salt. Around it gather the mourners, cloaks pulled tight against the chill air. Torches flicker in the hands of the living, their flames reflected in the dark waters. The body of the departed is carried forward and placed upon the deck, laid with care and reverence. The ship is not empty. It is filled with gifts, tools, weapons, jewelry, even food and drink. Each item is chosen with meaning. A warrior may rest beside his sword, his shield, his helmet. A woman may rest with brooches, beads, and the keys that marked her role as keeper of the household. A farmer may be given his tools, a fisherman his net. In some cases, animals were sacrificed, horses, dogs, even oxen, so that the dead would not travel alone. To the Vikings, the afterlife was a journey, and no one should set out unprepared. The mourners moved slowly around the ship, placing their offerings, whispering their prayers. A Skald steps forward, his voice carrying across the waves. He recites the sagas of the departed, their battles, their journeys, their kindnesses, their strength. Each word is a memory preserved, a story offered to the gods. When the time comes, the fire is lit. Torches touch the ship's hull, and soon flames rise high, crackling, leaping, devouring wood and cloth alike. The ship blazes against the night, its reflection shimmering on the water. The mourners stand still, their faces glowing in the light, their eyes fixed upon the flames. The fire consumes, but it also frees. Sometimes the ship was burned upon the water, set adrift before being lit, so that it sailed briefly into the darkness before vanishing in fire. Other times it burned on land, The ashes later gathered and buried in mounds that marked the earth for generations. Each way carried its own beauty, but the meaning was always the same. The ship was the soul's vessel, and the fire its wind. Picture it now, a Viking funeral ship ablaze beneath the stars. The waves lap quietly at the shore, the sky above vast and endless. The smoke rises upward, carrying with it prayers, memories, and the spirit of the one departed. The crackle of flame mingles with the hush of sea, the voices of the mourners with the whispers of wind. For those who stand and watch, the moment is both sorrowful and sacred. They are letting go, yet also sending onward. To us today, the image of the burning ship has become legendary. It is powerful, dramatic, unforgettable. But for the Vikings, it was not spectacle. It was ritual, deeply woven into their beliefs. The ship was the bridge between worlds. The fire was the key that unlocked the passage. Together, they carried the soul from the realm of the living into the halls of the gods. And not every ship was set aflame. Some were buried whole, covered with earth, their shape preserved in great mounds. These ship burials, found centuries later by archaeologists, reveal the treasures placed within: the weapons, the jewelry, the animals, the tools of daily life. In these graves, the ships became time capsules, holding not only the dead but the story of their world. Even in silence, the ship spoke of life, of death, of the journey beyond. As you sit by our fire tonight, let yourself feel the calm weight of this ritual. The crackle of flame, the rhythm of waves, the slow drifting of smoke, all of it was part of the Viking farewell. They did not hide death in silence. They faced it with fire, with ships, with song. And in doing so, they gave the soul a journey as noble as life itself. So rest here a little longer, by the ship ablaze upon the northern shore. Watch the fire rise. Watch the smoke climb into the night. Feel the sea at your feet, the stars above your head. And remember, as the Vikings did, that life is a voyage, and death is simply another sailing. In the chapters to come, we will see how these ceremonies gathered not only families, but entire communities. We will step into the gathering of kin and witness how the Vikings shared both grief and hope in the company of one another. But for now, let the image of the burning ship rest within you, steady as the fire beside us, an eternal vessel upon an eternal sea. The fire before us burns gently, the embers glowing with a steady light. In its warmth, imagine the call that would spread through the land when a Viking passed away. News of death was not kept quiet. It was carried on the wind, on the lips of messengers, on the footsteps of kin traveling from far-off villages. Death was not only the concern of one household, it was the concern of the whole community. When someone of importance died, their kin and companions gathered. Brothers, sisters, cousins, uncles, and distant relatives, all were summoned to take part in the rites. But it was not only family who came. Neighbors arrived, friends arrived, warriors who once stood side by side, women who once shared food and song. The death of one touched the lives of many. Picture it: a long hall, torches glowing against timbered walls. Outside, the air is cold, yet inside the space is alive with quiet movement. Mourners arrive in cloaks of wool and fur, some carrying offerings, others carrying news. The hall fills with voices low and solemn. Each new arrival brings with them not only grief, but also presence, the reminder that no one mourns alone. The gathering of kin was a ritual in itself. It was a weaving together of lives, a reminder of bonds, a display of honor. In the Viking world, kinship was everything. A man's worth was tied to his family, his allies, his people. And so, in death, it was only right that those bonds be shown. To honor the dead was also to honor the living who remained connected to them. Food was prepared, often in great amounts. Cauldrons bubbled, bread was baked, ale was poured into horns. The mourners would feast not as a denial of grief, but as part of it. To share food was to strengthen the bonds of kinship, to give comfort, to remind the living that life continued even as they said farewell. The dead lying in state was often displayed within the hall. Their body might be dressed in their finest clothing, embroidered tunics, silver brooches, polished weapons. A woman might be adorned with beads of amber, pendants of bronze, or keys that marked her authority within the household. A warrior might rest with his sword across his chest, his shield at his side. To present the dead in this way was to honor them, to let all who came see their dignity, their station, their story. As the kin gathered, they did more than weep. They spoke. They told stories of the departed, tales of hunts, of battles, of harvests, of laughter shared long ago. A skald, the poet of the community, might stand and recite a verse in their honor, weaving memory into rhythm. These stories were not only for comfort, they were for remembrance. Each tale carried the life of the dead into the hearts of those who listened, ensuring that memory would outlast the grave. The gathering was also a time of reconciliation. Old quarrels might be set aside, at least for a night, for the sake of honoring the departed. To bring anger into such a space was to dishonor not only the dead, but also the gods who oversaw the passage of souls. And so, the hall became a place of peace, even if only for a moment. Beyond the hall, the gathering extended into the community itself. Villages and farms slowed their work. People paused to attend, to show respect, to be part of the farewell. For the Vikings, funerals were not hidden away. They were public, visible, a way of showing the strength of bonds and the weight of memory. Think now of the sound within that hall, the low murmur of voices, the crackle of torches, the clatter of bowls and horns. The air is thick with the smell of roasted meat, of fresh bread, of burning wood. And beneath it all, the quiet presence of grief, felt not as silence but as togetherness. Each person adds their voice, their story, their presence. Together, they create a tapestry of remembrance. The gathering of kin was not only about the present moment, it was also about the future. The kin looked upon one another, reminded of the ties that bound them. They strengthened alliances, renewed promises, and prepared to carry forward the name of the one who had gone. Death was a moment of vulnerability, but also of strength, an opportunity to reaffirm the bonds that kept the community whole. By the fire before us now, you can almost hear them, those voices in the hall, rising and falling like waves against the shore. The laughter that breaks briefly through the sorrow, the clink of horns lifted in memory, the hush that falls when someone begins a story of the one they have lost. It is a human sound, timeless, echoing across centuries. As night deepens, the mourners may step outside, gathering around the pyre or the ship that waits. But before the fire is lit, before the final farewell is given, they have already shared something sacred, the gathering of kin. It is a reminder that no one walks alone into death, and no one remains alone among the living. So let the fire glow steady as we pause in this thought, that when the Vikings said goodbye, they did so together. That kinship was not broken by death, but strengthened in the act of remembrance. And that through food, through story, through presence, they wove sorrow into something enduring. Soon the flames of the funeral will rise, carrying the departed into the afterlife. But before that, the gathering of kin ensures that their memory is carried first within the hearts of the living. The fire whispers softly, and with its hum we step into another ritual of the Vikings, one woven not from wood or flame, but from breath, voice, and memory. For when a Viking died, silence was never the only answer. There were songs, there were chants, there were poems carried on the air like prayers, rising to meet the night sky. To the Vikings, words held power. They were not simply sounds but forces. A name spoken was a name kept alive. A story recited was a story preserved. And a song sung in honor of the dead was more than music. It was a bridge, carrying the soul across the unseen waters of the afterlife. Picture the hall again, or the shore where the ship rests. The mourners gather, their faces lit by torchlight, their breath curling into the cold air. And then a voice rises. Deep, slow, resonant. Perhaps it is the Skald, the poet, the keeper of sagas. Perhaps it is a family elder, or a friend whose voice trembles with grief. The first notes are long and low, stretching into the night. Others join, layering voices like waves upon waves. The songs were not always gentle. Some were fierce, reminding the dead and the living alike of battles fought, of courage shown, of strength that would never be forgotten. Others were softer, woven with sorrow. carrying the tenderness of farewell. But whatever form they took, they served the same purpose: to lift the spirit of the departed and to steady the hearts of those left behind. Poetry was central. Skaldic verse was intricate, filled with kennings, metaphors that turned the sea into the whale, road, or blood into battle, sweat. To speak of the dead in such language was to place them in the timeless world of myth, to honor them not only as people, but as figures within the larger story of the North. The verses linked the mortal with the divine, reminding all who listened that death itself was part of a grander tale. In some funerals, chants were used, simple, rhythmic, repeated lines that carried on like the beating of a drum. The voices of many joined together, deep and steady, creating a sound that seemed to echo beyond the hall, beyond the sea, into the very sky itself. Such chants soothed the mourners, grounding them in rhythm, giving them something to hold as grief threatened to overwhelm. Music, too, found its place. The Vikings had lyres, flutes, and simple drums. A lyre's strings might be plucked slowly, a mournful tune weaving between the voices. A drum might mark the passing of time, its steady beat like a heartbeat beneath the song. These sounds were not for performance, not for entertainment. They were for ritual, for memory, for the shaping of farewell. Imagine now the sound of a Viking funeral, the low chant of many voices blending into one, the rise of a skald's verse, sharp and clear like wind through pine, the pluck of a lyre string trembling in the night air. Together they form a sound both earthly and otherworldly, both human and divine. For the Vikings, song was not only for the living, it was for the dead. The departed lying in their ship or resting in the hall was thought to hear these words, to feel these sounds. The songs were a gift, a final offering, a reminder that they were loved, remembered, and never truly alone. And beyond the human ear, the songs were for the gods. Odin, god of poetry, listened. Freyja, goddess of love and death, listened. The words carried upward like smoke, like flame, like prayer. They honored not only the one who had died, but the divine powers who guided souls into the next realm. In some tales, the songs were believed to ease the soul's passage, to guide them on the road to Valhalla or to the quiet fields of Fólkvangr. Just as a sailor needed wind to fill their sails, so too did a soul need words to carry them onward. And so the songs became that wind, the unseen breath that moved them forward. As we sit by our fire tonight, let yourself imagine being part of such a moment. The sound around you, deep and steady. The glow of flames on faces, the shimmer of tears in eyes. The body before you, dressed in honor, resting in peace. And above all, the song. The voices of your people, your kin, your community, rising like the tide, carrying memory across the dark waters of night. The songs for the departed were not forgotten once the funeral ended. Verses were remembered, repeated in halls, shared in other gatherings. A song sung at a funeral could echo through years, ensuring that the name of the dead remained alive in memory. In this way, the funeral was not an ending, but the planting of a seed, a song that grew into legend. So rest with this thought as the fire crackles beside us, that to the Vikings, grief was never silent. It was given voice. It was given rhythm. It was sung, spoken, chanted into the world, so that sorrow could become remembrance, and remembrance could become eternal. Soon, we will move to other rituals, the symbols carved, the runes drawn, the marks left behind to guide the dead and remind the living. But before we go, let the song linger in your mind. Let it be low and steady like the hum of fire. Let it rise and fall like waves upon the sea. Let it carry you gently into rest, as it once carried Viking souls into eternity. The fire flickers, its glow dancing across the ground. In the hush of this moment, imagine another layer of Viking funerals. Not only song and story, but symbols carved into wood, stone, and memory. For the Vikings believed that the world was written in signs, that marks carried meaning beyond the eye, and that runes themselves held the power to guide, to protect, and to remember. Runes were more than letters. Each mark was a fragment of the cosmos, a whisper of divine knowledge, a piece of the magic Odin himself had won when he hung upon the world tree for 9 long nights. To carve a rune was to call upon power, To place a rune near the dead was to offer protection, guidance, and remembrance for their journey. Picture a slab of stone, smooth and tall, its surface etched with twisting lines. A runestone set upon the ground to endure wind, rain, and centuries. These stones were raised not only for kings and warriors, but also for mothers, for fathers, for kin who lived and died with honor. The carvings often spoke in simple words, a name, a kinship, a deed. Yet through those words, the memory of a life endured far beyond flesh. Some runestones showed serpents, their bodies curling around the inscriptions, symbolizing eternity, the cycle of death and rebirth. Others showed ships, carved with sails and shields, carrying the dead across unseen seas. To pass such a stone was to pass a story, to be reminded that lives were not forgotten, but marked into the very bones of the earth. In funerals, smaller carvings were made as well. Wooden posts might be marked with protective runes. Amulets carved with runic signs could be placed upon the body, slipped into a hand, or tied around the neck. These runes served as companions, as guardians, as whispers of power carried into the afterlife. Each rune carried meaning. The Algiz rune, shaped like a tree with arms raised, was a sign of protection, a shield against harm. The Answer's rune, shaped like a slanted fork, was tied to Odin, the giver of wisdom and poetry. The Radi rune, resembling a journeying path, symbolized travel, reminding all that death was not an end but a passage. To select a rune was to select a prayer, a hope, a guide for the soul's unseen road. But the runes were not only for the dead, they were also for the living. To carve a runestone was to declare to the world that this life mattered, that this person was loved, that their name would not fade into silence. It was an act of memory, of permanence, of placing grief into something lasting. Picture mourners gathered as a stone is raised. The ground trembles as it is set upright. Fresh carvings gleam against its surface, sharp and new, ready to withstand time. The people step back, looking upon the work, knowing that long after they themselves are gone, the stone will remain. In this way, the dead are never truly lost. Their story becomes part of the land itself. And beyond stone, symbols were drawn in ashes, scratched into the earth, painted upon shields or sails, spirals, circles, knots, marks of eternity, of cycles unbroken. Firelight caught upon them, making them shimmer, as though the symbols themselves were alive, breathing with meaning. Think now of the stillness of such a moment, a body resting in the ship, torches burning low, a carver bent over wood or stone, blades scraping in careful strokes. The crowd hushed, watching as meaning takes shape. Each line drawn is deliberate, each mark a prayer unspoken. It is art, but it is also magic, the kind of magic that turns grief into something tangible, something that cannot be erased. Runes were also chanted, spoken aloud. They became more than marks, they became vibration, resonance, sound woven with intention. Imagine a skald or priest standing before the fire, speaking each rune slowly, the crowd repeating in low unison. The sound rises and falls, deep as the sea, steady as the wind, filling the night with sacred rhythm. Each syllable becomes part of the farewell, a voice guiding the departed into the unseen. For the Viking symbols had the power to connect realms. The carving of runes, the raising of stones, the drawing of marks, all were bridges between the world of the living and the world of the dead. To place a rune was to declare you are remembered, you are protected, you are carried forward. And so, across the north, runestones still stand, weathered, worn, yet unbroken. They are echoes of voices that sang long ago, carved memories that time itself could not wash away. To walk among them is to walk among the dead, not in fear, but in companionship, in remembrance, in quiet honor. As we sit by the fire now, let your mind rest upon those stones, those runes, those symbols that carried love across the veil of death. They remind us that grief seeks permanence, that memory longs to be marked, that the act of farewell is also the act of eternal connection. Soon, the fire of the funeral will blaze higher, and the ship will carry its passenger into flame and smoke. But before that moment, the runes remain, etched, chanted, whispered. Silent guardians of memory, eternal companions of the soul. The fire glows steadily, its warmth wrapping around us like a cloak. And as it burns, Let us step into another part of the Viking farewell, one filled not with silence, not with sorrow alone, but with the gathering of kin, with food, with drink, with memory made tangible. For after the songs and the symbols, there was the funeral feast. The Vikings understood grief as more than mourning. It was also a duty to the living, to comfort one another, to strengthen bonds, to affirm life even in the shadow of death. And so, once the rites were done, once the fire had burned low, or the ship had drifted into the horizon, people gathered. They gathered in longhouses, in mead halls, or even beside the shore, to share in a meal that was as much ritual as it was sustenance. Picture the great hall, the walls lined with shields, the air thick with the smell of roasting meat. Torches blaze, casting golden light across the benches. The living sit shoulder to shoulder, their faces weary with grief yet softened by companionship. Before them, platters of food, horns of mead, baskets of bread. It is not merely a meal. It is a remembrance, a celebration, an act of keeping the dead present among the living. The feast began with offerings. Plates of food, cups of drink, the choicest cuts of meat were sometimes placed aside for the spirit of the departed. This was not waste. It was respect. It was believed that the dead might partake in spirit, that their essence would be nourished alongside the living. To set aside a portion was to say you are not forgotten. You still share in what we share. Then the horns were lifted. Mead, golden and sweet, filled the air with its scent. One by one, toasts were spoken. A warrior raised his horn and spoke of battles fought together. A mother raised hers and spoke of love never broken. A friend raised theirs and spoke of laughter, of nights beneath the stars, of memories too dear to fade. Each toast was a story, each sip a bridge across the gulf of absence. The feast was long, food was plentiful, for to starve in grief was seen as dishonor to both the dead and the living. Roasted meats, stews thick with herbs, fish drawn from nearby waters, bread still warm from the fire. Children ate, elders ate, warriors and farmers alike. All bound together by the same table, the same sorrow, the same love. Between courses the Skald might rise. His voice carried through the hall, weaving poems of the departed, telling tales of their deeds, their kindness, their courage. Laughter sometimes followed, for grief does not erase joy. A well-remembered story of mischief, of triumph, of some small moment of life, could bring smiles even through tears. And so the hall echoed not only with sadness, but with warmth, with the sound of life continuing. Music joined the meal. A lyre strummed gently, its strings plucked in slow, soothing rhythms. A drum beat softly, steady as a heartbeat. Sometimes dancers rose, their steps measured, graceful, moving in circles that mirrored eternity. For the feast was not simply eating. It was ritual, it was healing, it was a weaving together of memory and life. Imagine the glow of such a hall, the fire in the hearth blazing, its smoke curling into the rafters, the flicker of torches along the walls, the smell of honey, of roasting meat, of pine resin crackling in the flames. Outside, the night was vast and cold, but inside there was warmth, there was community, there was the presence of both the living and the spirit of the dead. The funeral feast also marked transition. The dead were honored, remembered, but the feast looked forward as well. It was a moment when inheritance was declared, when new responsibilities were spoken, when the path of the family continued even as it mourned. A son might be named the head of the household. A daughter's place might be secured. Promises were made, bonds strengthened. The feast, then, was as much about the future as it was about the past. Some accounts speak of feasts lasting days, with songs and stories stretching into the night, with food and drink replenished as often as memory itself. To honor the dead was to live well, to keep the hall alive with voices, to ensure that absence did not silence the community. And yet, in the quiet moments of the feast, there was space for stillness, a horn raised in silence, a candle lit and left burning, a plate placed gently before an empty chair. These simple acts carried weight as heavy as stone, for they spoke the language of remembrance, the unspoken, the unseen, the eternal. Now, as you rest by this fire, imagine yourself among them. The sound of voices around you, the taste of bread upon your tongue, the warmth of mead in your chest. Before you, faces lit with grief but also with love. Above you, the beams of the hall, dark with smoke and age. And beside you always, the memory of the one who has gone. Present not in body, but in story, in toast, in song, in the sharing of food and drink. This was the funeral feast of the Vikings, a gathering not only of sorrow, but of strength, of love, of memory made real. It was the place where the dead were honored and the living were bound together, where grief was softened by company, and where the story of life continued. And so, as the hall quiets, as the torches burn low, as the last toast is raised, the community rests. They have eaten, they have remembered, they have shared. Tomorrow brings new days, new tasks, new life. But tonight, the feast has bound them together, living and dead alike, in a circle of memory that does not break. The fire crackles quietly, its glow soft and steady, and as we sit with it, let us turn our thoughts to the women who shaped the Viking funeral. For though tales of the North often speak of warriors and kings, there were others whose presence was just as vital. The priestesses, the mothers, the wives, the daughters, keepers of memory and guides of spirit. When death came to the Vikings, it was often women who stood closest to the boundary between worlds. The sagas speak of the Velva, the seeress, the priestess who knew the language of the unseen. She was called upon to guide rituals, to chant the words that helped the soul find its path, to weave the ceremony into meaning. Wrapped in cloaks heavy with beads, staffs in hand, she stood as a bridge between the living and the dead. Her voice carried not only through the hall, but into the silence of the spirit realm. But beyond the priestesses, there were the women of the household, the mothers who prepared the body, washing it with quiet reverence, combing hair, dressing the departed in garments of dignity. The wives who laid tokens upon the chest, a ring, a weapon, a carved piece of wood. Daughters placed flowers, herbs, or food, each gift carrying both love and meaning. These acts were not small, they were threads in the tapestry of farewell, each gesture binding memory with care. In the great funerals described by travelers, women sometimes led the lament. Their voices rose in chants, in keening cries, in songs that lifted sorrow into the air. To sing grief aloud was to honor it, to let it flow free so that the living might be unburdened. The sound of women's voices at a funeral was not a weakness. It was strength, a recognition that mourning was holy work. Imagine the longhouse filled with such sound. Torches burning low, faces bowed, and from one side of the hall, the slow, rising song of women weaving sorrow into melody. It echoes through the beams, it drifts out into the night, it touches every heart present. Even the warriors, hardened by sea and battle, let their tears fall quietly as the voices of mothers and wives remind them that love does not die, even when the body is gone. Women also kept the memory of the dead alive beyond the ceremony. Around hearths and in the weaving rooms, stories were told. A mother might whisper tales of her husband's bravery to her children. A grandmother might remind the young of ancestors long past, keeping their names unforgotten. In this way, women became the guardians of legacy, ensuring that the fire of memory never faded. Some accounts even describe priestesses leading the sacrifice of animals during funerals, offering them to accompany the dead into the next world. These were difficult acts, yet they were performed with steady hands, for the belief was firm that the spirit must not travel alone, that offerings would provide comfort and strength beyond the grave. But the presence of women was not only ritual, it was deeply personal. A wife weeping at the pyre, holding her children close, a daughter clutching her father's cloak, unwilling to let it go. These human moments, too, were part of the ceremony, for the Vikings knew that death was not distant. It touched every heart, and the grief of women was not hidden, but honored. Travelers to the north sometimes misunderstood this, seeing only the surface of ritual. They wrote of women in strange clothes, singing strange songs, moving among the flames and smoke. But to the Vikings themselves, this was the most natural expression of the sacred. Women were the carriers of life, and so too were they the voices of farewell when life ended. Close your eyes and picture it. a funeral by the water's edge, a ship prepared, laden with gifts. Men stand silently, torches in hand, but it is the women who step forward, who sing the songs, who light the incense, who speak the last words. The smoke rises, the ship drifts, and the voices of women carry across the waves, soft but unbroken, as though even the sea itself listens. The sagas tell of queens and noblewomen buried with grandeur, their funerals rich with symbols. But they also hint at the countless ordinary women whose names are lost, who washed their loved ones, who raised their voices in song, who comforted children at the edge of the pyre. Their work, though often unrecorded, was no less sacred. They were the unseen hands that gave shape to mourning. And so, as the flames dance before us, let us honor them. The priestesses with staffs of power, the mothers with quiet hands, the wives with unbroken love, the daughters with songs like silver threads. They were the keepers of the threshold, the ones who helped the living release, and the dead to journey on. For in the Viking funeral, women were not only witnesses, they were guides. They carried the ceremony upon their voices, their gestures, their grief. And without them, the farewell would not be whole. Now the fire before us settles, glowing low, and we imagine those voices still, rising from longhouses, from hillsides, from ships upon the sea. Echoes of women who carried sorrow with grace, who shaped the rites of farewell, who gave to death the same reverence they gave to life. Their presence lingers, like embers that do not fade. The fire hums in low rhythm, and with it comes memory of sound, voices rising in the night, carrying sorrow and hope together. In the Viking funeral, silence was never the only companion. There was song, there was chant. There were laments that opened the heart like the tide pulling back from the shore. For the people of the north, words held power, but words wrapped in melody were even stronger. To sing at a funeral was to shape grief into something that could be carried by many voices, not just one. It was to give sorrow a vessel, to let it float upon the air until the weight of loss no longer crushed the living. Travelers who came to witness the funerals wrote of chants, deep, repetitive tones that seemed to move with the rhythm of fire and sea. Sometimes these were led by priestesses, sometimes by groups of women, and sometimes by the whole gathered community. The sound was not polished music, not performance, but something older, voices trembling with the rawness of parting, voices steady with ritual, voices lifted in unison so that no one mourned alone. Imagine standing by the pyre. Flames curl upward, sparks drift like stars breaking loose, and behind the crackling fire is the low hum of song. A circle of mourners gathers, their voices weaving in and out, some rising high, others falling low, creating a sound that is both mournful and beautiful. It is not music for the ear alone, it is music for the soul. The chants often told stories of the departed. A warrior's song might speak of battles fought, seas crossed, treasures won. A woman's farewell might honor her weaving, her wisdom, her love that bound the family. Children too had songs sung for them, gentle and tender, words of innocence and loss. In each case, the song was not only for the dead, it was for the living. A reminder that life had meaning, and that meaning would not vanish with death. Some of these laments were spontaneous, born in the moment. A wife might cry her grief aloud, her words turning into a broken song that others then echoed. A mother's wail might become a chant repeated until it filled the night. The act of singing was both an offering to the dead and a release for the living, carrying sorrow outward so it did not remain locked inside. The sagas also speak of instruments, horns sounding deep and long like the call of the sea itself, drums beating slowly like the heartbeat of the earth. Sometimes a lyre was played, its strings trembling beneath careful fingers, weaving notes between the voices. These sounds joined the chants, shaping the night into a symphony of farewell. And always, above the sound of voices and instruments, was the sound of fire, the crackle and hiss, the low roar, the sigh of wood turning to ash. The fire itself seemed to join the song, as though it too mourned, as though it too understood the meaning of parting. Close your eyes and hear it now. The slow rhythm of a drum, the rise and fall of many voices, a horn echoing across the fjord. the flames responding with their own music. The night carrying it all upward, into the sky where stars looked down in silence. To the Vikings, music was not decoration, it was magic. They believed sound could cross boundaries, that chants could reach gods, that laments could comfort spirits. When voices rose with smoke, they were thought to travel together, carrying the soul along, guiding it toward the next world. Even in smaller funerals, without ships or grand feasts, there was song. In quiet villages, a family might gather in a circle, their voices low, their tears falling as they hummed a familiar melody. Children might sing the lullabies their mother once sang to them, offering them back as a gift as she journeyed into death. These moments, though humble, were no less sacred than the great chants of kings. In this way, music was memory. Each note held pieces of a life. Each chant was a thread connecting the living and the dead. Long after the fire cooled, the songs remained in the hearts of those who had sung them. The melody might return weeks later, while working in fields, while rowing a boat, while sitting by a hearth. To sing was to remember, and to remember was to keep the departed alive in spirit. The Vikings believed that sound could bridge worlds. Just as smoke rose to the sky, so too did voices. The song of farewell was not trapped in air. It traveled beyond, to where the gods listened, to where ancestors dwelled, to where the departed soul awaited welcome. And so, music was never absent from the funeral fire. It was the breath of the living, the gift of the heart, the thread that carried love past the edge of death. Now, as the flames before us sink lower, listen closely. Imagine the voices still echoing through the night, chants rising like the tide, laments soft as falling snow, songs of farewell that linger long after silence has returned. Their echoes remain, carried in memory, carried in time, carried in the gentle hum of the fire even now. The fire flickers before us, and with each flicker smoke rises, curling upward into the night. To the Vikings, this was no mere accident of flame, it was a sacred bridge. They believed that smoke was not just air and ash, but a carrier of spirit, a messenger to the gods, a path through which the soul of the departed could ascend. When a body was placed upon the pyre and flames consumed it, all eyes eventually lifted skyward. The smoke, dark and thick at first, then lighter as the fire steadied, was watched with reverence. It was said that in the shifting shapes, one might glimpse the spirit's form. The soul, freed from flesh, did not vanish into nothingness. It traveled with the smoke, borne aloft like a bird rising into the heavens. This belief was not strange to them. In their world, everything had a connection: the sea to the sky, the earth to the roots of Yggdrasil, life to death. The rising of smoke was a visible sign of the invisible journey. The gods, watching from their halls in Asgard, would see the column of smoke and know another soul was coming home. Imagine standing at such a funeral. Flames crackle at your feet, and above you smoke climbs in spirals, blending with clouds, with stars, with the vastness of the night. Each tendril seems alive, reaching higher, carrying not only the spirit of the one who has died, but also the prayers, the songs, the tears of those left behind. Nothing is lost, all is lifted. The sagas tell us of grand funerals where ships burned and thick smoke trailed far across the fjords. From miles away, villagers could see it, a towering signal against the horizon. To them, it was not destruction but transformation. A soul was leaving this world, and the gods themselves could not fail to notice. There was also a sense of purification. Fire cleans the body, reducing it to ash, but smoke carried away what lingered: pain, regret, unfinished threads of life. As it drifted skyward, it left the soul lighter, ready to step beyond. For those watching, the sight gave comfort. To see smoke was to see passage. Even in smaller rites, with modest fires, the meaning was the same. A family might gather in the forest, lighting a pyre of pine and birch, watching the smoke climb between the trees. The father's spirit, the mother's, the child's. It did not matter how grand or simple the fire. The smoke would find its way, winding upward, past clouds and storms, until it reached the realm of gods and ancestors. Some believed the smoke carried messages. Whispers spoken into the fire might rise with it. words of love or farewell carried beyond mortal hearing. Take this message to Odin. Someone might say softly, "Tell him my father comes bravely," or "Carry my love to her so she does not feel alone." In this way, smoke was not only transport for the soul, but also for the voices of the living. Picture it a circle of mourners, their faces lit orange by the flames. One by one, they lean close to the fire, murmuring words. They do not expect to be heard by human ears. They trust the smoke to take their whispers upward, where gods and spirits dwell. The fire hisses, the smoke thickens, and soon their words are gone, absorbed into the sky. The smoke itself had a presence, sometimes curling gently, sometimes wild and restless. People watched it closely, reading omens in its shapes. If it rose straight and strong, it was seen as a good sign the soul traveled clearly, without hindrance. If it swirled and scattered, there was unease, perhaps storms awaited, or the gods required further offerings. In this way, the fire and its smoke became a living oracle, a silent message from the unseen. But no matter its form, smoke always meant transformation. It was the proof that death was not an end but a passage. The body was gone, yet something remained, rising, shifting, dissolving into the vastness of the sky. Even now, as we sit with the fire before us, we can feel that meaning. Watch the way smoke curls and disappears. Watch how it never stays still, always reaching upward, always moving on. It reminds us that nothing truly ends, only changes form, only travels beyond our sight. The Vikings knew this. They stood by their pyres and watched the smoke, not with despair but with solemn faith. For them, it was not just fire consuming flesh, it was the sky receiving a soul. So let us watch with them across time. Flames rising, smoke climbing, voices quiet. The gods above, looking down, watching the trail of a spirit carried into their halls. In the smoke we see journey. In the smoke we see farewell. In the smoke we see eternity. The fire before us burns low now, its smoke soft and thin. But in imagination, the great pyres still rise, their smoke still climbs, their souls still travel. And in that vision, the Viking belief endures. That smoke itself was the pathway, the thread that bound earth to heaven and mortal to God. The fire outside had dimmed, the last embers sinking into ash. Yet the night did not end with silence. For the Vikings, farewell was never complete without gathering, without food, without drink, without story. This was the feast of memory, a time when sorrow and celebration sat side by side, when the living honored the dead not only with tears, but with laughter, remembrance, and the warmth of med shared among kin. Imagine it a long hall lit by torches, smoke curling upward to the rafters, shadows moving across carved beams. The sound of fire still echoes faintly from outside, but now the air is filled with other sounds. Voices rising in conversation, the clatter of wooden bowls, the low hum of a song not of mourning, but of life continuing. At the center of this feast was mead, golden and glowing, poured into horns and shared among those who had stood by the pyre. Mead was more than drink. It was ritual, symbol, bond. To raise a horn was to salute the dead, to seal friendship, to remind one another that community endured even in grief. Each sip was a prayer, each toast a vow that the departed would not be forgotten. Food, too, carried meaning. Platters of roasted meat, fish pulled from nearby waters, bread fresh from the fire. These were not indulgence alone, but offering. To eat together after death was to reaffirm life, to show that the chain of survival, of kinship, did not break. Some believed that the spirit of the deceased, now traveling with the gods, could still taste the feast through memory and through the smoke that lingered in the hall. But more important than drink or food were the stories. The feast was a place where silence gave way to words. Warriors spoke of the battles they had fought alongside the departed. Friends recounted journeys across sea and mountain. Children repeated the lessons their mother or father had given them. Each story was like a stone placed upon the memory of the one who had gone, building a monument not of stone and earth, but of voice and heart. Picture the hall. One man stands lifting his horn, his voice rough with grief, steadies as he speaks. He tells of a winter voyage when storms nearly drowned the ship, but the departed stood at the helm fearless, guiding them safely home. The hall listens, silent at first, then nods, some smiling, some weeping. Another rises, a woman this time, her tale not of war but of kindness, of how the one they mourned once mended a quarrel between neighbors, turning anger into peace. And so the night continues, each memory adding another flame to the fire of remembrance. Children listened closely at these feasts, for the stories became lessons, legends, even warnings. They learned who their ancestors were, what courage meant, what loyalty demanded. A boy hearing of his father's deeds might grow with pride, determined to live as bravely. A girl hearing of her mother's wisdom might carry that wisdom into her own household one day. In this way, the feast was not only backward-looking, but forward-carrying, planting seeds of legacy in young hearts. The feast also served a practical role. Death shook a community, leaving gaps in family, in strength, in leadership. The gathering after a funeral became a moment to reaffirm bonds, to promise help, to share burdens. A widow might hear pledges from neighbors that she would not be left alone, that her children would be cared for. Brothers might clasp hands, vowing to keep their family strong. In the glow of torches, over shared bread and drink, grief was transformed into resilience. Yet even with food and laughter, the presence of death lingered. Between tales, silence would sometimes fall. Eyes would drift toward the empty seat where the departed might have sat. The absence was felt, sharp and heavy. But then someone would speak again, raising a horn, filling the void with words, refusing to let the silence consume them. For the Vikings, memory itself was sacred. To forget a person was the true death. The body might burn, the smoke might rise, but as long as stories were told, the spirit remained among the living. Thus the feast was more than gathering. It was an act of defiance against time, a promise that memory would not fade. Even now we can feel the echo of such feasts. Around modern tables at wakes and gatherings, people still share food and story after funerals. We still lift glasses, we still laugh through tears, we still keep the dead alive through words. The Viking feast of memory is not lost to time. It survives in us, in every shared remembrance. So as we sit by the fire tonight, imagine the long hall, the clamor of voices, the warmth of mid, the scent of roasted food. Imagine the laughter through tears, the stories that bind, the promises made beneath smoke, darkened beams. Picture the faces, lit by torchlight, carrying both sorrow and strength. For this was the Viking way to honor the dead not only with fire, but with memory, with feast, with the enduring bonds of the living. The night grows late, and the feast begins to quiet. Horns empty, torches gutter low. Yet the stories told will linger, passed on again and again, becoming part of the endless chain of memory. The departed may be gone, but they live on in the voices that rise, in the hearts that remember, in the feast that binds the living to the dead. And so the hall grows dim, but memory does not. In the silence that follows, the spirit rests not in darkness, but in story, in love, in the enduring warmth of those who remain. The feast had ended, the voices in the long hall fading into sleep. But outside, by the shore or upon the field, the fire of the pyre still smoldered. Where once there had been roaring flame, only embers now remained, red, glowing, fragile in the darkness. It was here that mourners often lingered, holding vigil in the long hours of night. This was the silent watch. The air was heavy, filled with the faint smell of smoke and charred wood. Above, the sky stretched wide and endless, stars glimmering like 1,000 watchful eyes. The waves, if the pyre stood near water, lapped gently against the shore, their rhythm slow and eternal. Around the embers, figures sat cloaked in silence, their faces dimly lit by the glow. They spoke little, for this was a time not of words, but of presence. The silent watch was more than mourning, it was communion. Those who stayed by the dying fire believed that the soul lingered still, not fully gone, hovering close in the smoke and ash. To leave too soon was to abandon the spirit before its journey was complete. So they remained patient, quiet, their vigil a gift of love and loyalty. Imagine them, a mother seated upon the earth, her hands folded, eyes fixed upon the last sparks of flame. A brother standing still, watching the smoke curl upward, as though searching for signs of passage. A child, curled in a blanket, leaning against their kin, drifting between wakefulness and dreams, yet unwilling to leave the fire behind. Each heart was tied to the glowing embers, unwilling to surrender the final connection. The silence of the watch was not empty. It was filled with memory. Those who sat in stillness found their thoughts returning again and again to moments shared with the departed. The sound of their laughter, the weight of their presence, the lessons they had left behind. In the hush, memory spoke more loudly than words. The flames, now quiet, mirrored the life once bright and now dimmed, and yet their warmth remained, just as the warmth of love endures beyond death. Some whispered prayers into the night, soft enough that only the stars might hear. Others hummed low songs, almost to themselves, melodies without words, meant to comfort both the living and the departing soul. It was said that even the gods listened in these hours, when silence stretched so wide that every breath seemed to carry meaning. The silent watch also held a sacred role. Fire was not merely destruction, it was a bridge. As the embers cooled, the spirit was thought to move fully into the realm beyond. By remaining near, mourners ensured that this passage was not lonely, that the final crossing was accompanied by the presence of kin. In their stillness, they gave strength to the soul, as though holding the door open a little longer, so it would not walk into darkness alone. The world itself seemed to honor the watch. Animals quieted, the wind softened, the sea moved with gentler rhythm. Even time felt slower, as though night stretched itself out, unwilling to close upon the mourners too quickly. To sit with the embers was to step outside the rush of life, to linger in a space between worlds. The living on one side, the dead now passing into the other. And so they stayed. Some until the embers turned black, until only cold ash remained. Others until dawn, when the first light of the sun spilled across the land, washing away the night's shadows. There was no single rule for how long the silent watch should last. It ended when the mourners themselves felt it was complete, when they could finally rise, though heavy-hearted, and walk away knowing they had kept their vigil faithfully. This quiet custom speaks to something universal. Across cultures, across time, people have kept watch with their dead. Candles are burned, lamps are left lit, prayers are whispered through the night. The Vikings, seated by their embers, were not so different from us today. When we sit at hospital bedsides, or when we keep a candle glowing on a table, to remain with someone in their final hours, whether in life or in memory, is one of the most ancient acts of love we can offer. As we imagine the silent watch tonight, let us place ourselves there among them. Feel the damp earth beneath, the cool night air upon the skin. Hear the soft crackle of the last coals, the distant lap of waves, the whisper of wind through grass. Watch as sparks drift upward, rising briefly, before vanishing into the night sky. Feel the weight of silence, not heavy with fear, but tender with care. For this was the gift of the watch, to remind both the living and the dead that no journey is ever taken alone. Even as the fire dies, even as the body is gone, presence remains, and presence is powerful. The hours stretch on. The embers fade, glowing less brightly with each passing moment. At last, dawn begins to stir. A pale line of light touches the horizon. One by one, the watchers rise, their hearts wary yet steadied. The vigil is over. The soul has gone where it must, carried by smoke, guided by silence, held by memory. And so the silent watch ends, not with words, not with ritual, but with the simple act of rising and walking away, leaving behind not abandonment but peace. When the fire had done its work, when wood and flesh had become ash and ember, the mourners faced their next task, to decide the resting place of what remained. The great flames had lifted the spirit skyward, but the ashes, dark and heavy, lay upon the earth. For the Vikings, these ashes were not waste. They were sacred remnants, touched by fire, marked by the journey between life and death. The burial of ashes took many forms, each rich with meaning. In some places, the cooled pyre was left undisturbed, its ashes scattering slowly with the wind and rain, returning to the soil. In others, the remains were gathered carefully, sifted from the charred wood. collected in cloth or vessel. Every action was deliberate, filled with reverence. To touch the ashes was to touch what was once a person, and though the fire had transformed them, their presence lingered still. The most honored ashes were placed in mounds, earthen hills built by hand, sometimes large enough to be seen for miles. A mound was more than a grave. It was a monument, a marker upon the land, a sign that here lived someone whose life mattered. Within the mound, not only ashes might be placed, but treasures, weapons, jewelry, tools, sometimes even the bones of animals sacrificed in the rite. Each object told a story. Each addition ensured that the memory of the departed remained tied to the earth. Others were laid to rest in urns, simple or ornate, crafted of clay, stone, or metal. These urns were buried in family grounds, forests, or near sacred sites. Some were set beside rivers, where water carried whispers of memory. Others were placed near farms, so that daily life would continue close to the presence of ancestors. The urn itself became a vessel not just for ashes, but for remembrance. There were also ship burials without flame. In these, the body was cremated elsewhere, but the ashes were laid inside a ship, sometimes full-sized, sometimes symbolic, carved in wood or stone. The ship was then buried beneath earth and stone, its outline preserved as a lasting symbol of the soul's journey. These burials echoed the same belief as the burning ships that death was a voyage, and the soul needed a vessel to cross into the beyond. Some ashes were scattered, though less often. To scatter meant to release fully, to let wind and sea claim what remained. Fishermen and seafarers might have their ashes given to the ocean, waves carrying them into the deep, mingling them with the vast and eternal waters. In such scattering, the soul was thought to become part of the natural world, no longer bound to one place, but flowing everywhere. Among families, there was also the quiet act of keeping a portion of ashes. A small handful might be placed within a pendant or buried at the threshold of a home, so that the spirit of the loved one continued to guard and guide. This practice, though humble, shows the tenderness of remembrance, that even amidst grand rites, intimacy was never lost. The burial of ashes also reflected social standing. Kings and chieftains received great mounds, visible long after their deaths, commanding the landscape. Warriors might be buried with their weapons, a sword laid across their remains, so that even in death they carried their honor. Women of wisdom and power, priestesses and mothers, might have their ashes placed with staffs, jewels or keys, symbols of the roles they had held in life. Children, by contrast, were often laid to rest with toys, carved animals or small treasures, each object a final gesture of love. To the Vikings, burial was not simply disposal, it was continuity. They believed that the land itself held memory, that the presence of ancestors strengthened fields, guarded homes, and watched over families. By burying ashes in sacred places, they wove the departed into the living fabric of their world. Each mound, each urn, each scattering was a way of saying, "You are not gone. You remain among us." As dawn came after a funeral night, the task of burial was often carried out. The fire's smoke had lifted the spirit, but the earth awaited what was left behind. With solemn hands, mourners worked together, digging, shaping, placing. Words might be whispered, prayers spoken, songs sung once more. Finally, the earth was closed, sealing the remains within. And then came silence. A mound stood where there had been none, or an urn lay hidden beneath soil. The ashes had found their home. The mourners knew they had fulfilled their duty, not only to the soul but to themselves. For burial gave closure. It marked an end, even as memory promised continuation. Today, long after their time, many of these mounds still rise across the northern lands, green with grass, weathered by centuries, yet standing as reminders of the lives once lived and honored. Archaeologists uncover urns, treasures, bones charred by fire, each whispering the old truth that to the Vikings, death was not destruction but transformation. The ashes, far from forgotten, were the seeds of remembrance. So, let us imagine it now. The fire has burned, the vigil has passed. The ashes lie ready, cool in the morning light. With care, with reverence, with love, they are gathered, carried, and given to the earth. A mound rises, a song is sung, and the journey is complete. The soul has gone beyond the flames, but here, in the soil and in memory, something remains forever. The fire fades, the ashes are laid to rest, and yet the story is not over. For the Vikings, death was never an end. It was a crossing, a passage through the flames into realms unseen. They believed that beyond the burning pyre, beyond the mound and the urn, the soul traveled onward, into places shaped by gods, destiny, and memory. The Norse imagination pictured many paths for the spirit, not one alone. Each soul's journey depended on the life it had lived, the manner of its death, and sometimes the will of the gods themselves. In this way, death was as varied as life, full of possibilities, each one a reflection of the person who had gone before. The most famed destination was Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain. Here, warriors who fell bravely in battle were welcomed by Odin himself. They imagined a vast golden hall, with shields for a roof, spears for rafters, and benches lined with heroes. Each day, the warriors would fight once more, their wounds mending at night. And each evening they would feast together on the meat of a boar that was reborn every morning. Mead would flow endlessly, and the laughter of comrades filled the air. For the warrior's soul, this was not rest, but glory without end. Yet Valhalla was not the only hall. There was also Fólkvangr, the field ruled by the goddess Freyja. Here, she welcomed many of the dead, some warriors, some not. Her meadows were gentler than Odin's hall, filled with beauty, peace, and the care of a goddess known for love as much as for battle. For some, this was a more fitting afterlife, a place of balance and warmth. Others might find themselves in hell, a realm not of fire and torment as later imaginations painted it, but of shadow and stillness. Hell was ruled by the goddess of the same name, half alive, half corpse, who watched over those who died of sickness, old age, or misfortune. Her realm was neither punishment nor reward. It was simply another home for the dead, where souls dwelt quietly, apart from the living. To the Vikings, hell was not feared in the same way later ages feared hell. It was the natural resting place for many, a place of peace beyond the reach of strife. Some believed in journeys to the sea, where drowned sailors joined the halls of the sea goddess Ran. There, beneath waves, they lived on in a realm of deep waters, welcomed by the goddess who had claimed them. In this, even death at sea was not meaningless, but a continuation, shaped by the element that had defined their lives. Still others told of souls returning to the earth itself. Ancestors were thought to linger near burial mounds, guarding their descendants, guiding harvests, and watching over homes. The land was alive with their presence. A stone raised on a hill, a mound rising near a farm, was not just a marker of the dead. It was a dwelling of spirit. To walk past it was to walk in the presence of one's forebears. For some, the journey went even further, into mysteries only the Skalds whispered of. The soul might travel the road to hell, crossing a bridge of gold, greeted by maidens of the underworld. It might pass the roots of Yggdrasil, the great world tree, whose branches touched all realms. There the soul could wander into the hidden places of gods and giants, where fate itself was woven by the Norns, the weavers of destiny. In every telling, one truth was constant: death was not annihilation. The soul endured, whether in battle halls, shadowed realms, or the soil beneath grass, something of the person lived on. To the Vikings, the fire was a doorway, not a destruction. The smoke rose to the sky, but the spirit walked paths unseen, joining the endless cycle of life, death, and memory. And for those left behind, these beliefs offered comfort. To think of a loved one in Valhalla, drinking mead among comrades, was to imagine them joyful and strong. To think of them in hell was to picture them safe, watched by a goddess who ruled her realm with quiet dignity. To imagine them as ancestors dwelling nearby was to feel their presence still close at hand. In this way, grief was softened. The living could believe that though a body was gone, the soul continued, always somewhere beyond the flames. Even today, these visions endure. The sagas, the poems, the myths have carried them forward, telling us how the Norse saw the great journey. And though the details shift, the heart remains the same: death is a voyage, not an end. Each flame on a pyre was a light upon the road, guiding the soul into realms eternal. So let us picture it now. The fire has cooled, the ashes are buried. Yet far beyond the horizon, the soul walks onward. Perhaps to a golden hall where laughter rings. Perhaps to meadows where a goddess waits. Perhaps into shadow, into earth, into sea. Wherever it goes not alone, for countless others have walked the path before, and countless more will follow. Beyond the flames, there is always something more. The funeral fire has faded, the chants have quieted, and the ashes have been laid to rest. But what lingers is more than smoke or memory. These rites, repeated across generations, carved themselves into the identity of the Viking people. They were not simply rituals of farewell. They were statements of who they were, what they believed, and how they wished to be remembered. To understand the Vikings is to understand their funerals. For in death, they revealed their values most clearly. The pyres and burials told of courage, loyalty, kinship, and honor. They spoke of a people who believed life should echo beyond its final breath, carried through fire, story, and song. The grandeur of a funeral was not only for the dead, it was for the living. To see a ship set aflame, to hear chants in the night, to share mead in memory, was to feel part of something greater than oneself. It reminded each man, woman, and child that they were threads in a vast tapestry, connected to ancestors, kin, and gods alike. The rites were a promise: live with courage, live with honor, and you too will be remembered in fire and song. Even the smallest ceremony held meaning. A poor farmer, buried with a simple tool or a piece of bread, was not forgotten. His burial still echoed the same beliefs that guided kings: life had value, and memory must be tended. In this way, the rites bound all people together. Wealth and power might shape the size of the funeral, but the purpose remained the same: to honor, to remember, to guide the soul onward. These practices also shaped how the Vikings saw themselves in relation to the world. The fire was not just fire, it was a link to the heavens. The mound was not just earth, it was the body of the land, holding ancestors within it. The chants were not just words, they were spells, weaving grief into strength. In this way, every funeral tied the people to nature, to gods, and to each other. The legacy of these rites also lived on in the sagas. Skalds and storytellers wove them into verse, ensuring that future generations would not forget. Tales of heroes did not end with their last battle, but with their funeral. How they were laid to rest, what treasures they carried, how their people mourned them. To tell the story of death was to honor life. The sagas became eternal funeral fires, their words glowing in memory just as flames once glowed upon pyres. In this way, funerals became both history and myth. They were acts of remembrance, but also performances of identity. Each time a ship was burned, each time a mound was raised, it was as if the Vikings were declaring, "This is who we are. This is how we honor life. This is how we face death." The rites also shaped the way outsiders saw them. Traders, travelers, and chroniclers carried tales of fiery ships and solemn chants far beyond the north. These stories painted the Vikings not merely as raiders or wanderers, but as people of deep belief, with ceremonies both fierce and beautiful. Even enemies, watching their fallen foes given to fire, could not help but see the dignity of the rites. And so, the legacy spread. Centuries later, when poets and historians looked back, it was the funerals that stood out. The burning ships, the weeping songs, the solemn gatherings. The image of a Viking funeral became a symbol, a lasting fire upon the imagination of the world. But perhaps the truest legacy was carried within the hearts of those who lived on. For every funeral was a lesson. A child who stood in the glow of flames learned that death was not silence but passage. A warrior who watched a comrade honored with chants knew that his own courage would not be forgotten. A widow who sang farewell knew that love, once given, was eternal. These were lessons carried forward, shaping lives just as much as they shaped memory. And so the funeral rites were never just about death. They were about life, about how to live in such a way that when the fire came, one's name would still be spoken, one's deeds still sung, one's spirit still remembered. In this, the Vikings created something enduring, a way of facing mortality with strength, with beauty, with fire that burned brighter than fear. The legacy of the rites is this: that no life is too small to be honored, no death without meaning, no memory without fire to keep it alive. And even now, though centuries have passed, we still feel the glow of those ancient pyres, still hear the echo of their chants, still sense the presence of their courage in the stories left behind. The flames have gone out, but the legacy burns on. The flames of a funeral burn only for a night, but their memory can last for centuries. So it was with the rites of the Vikings. Though the pyres cooled, though the mounds grew over with grass, their ceremonies lingered in the minds of those who saw them, heard of them, or read of them in the sagas. The echoes of these funerals reached far beyond the fjords and forests of the north, carried into history, legend, and imagination. One of the strongest echoes comes from the sagas themselves. The Icelanders, great keepers of memory, set their ancestors' deeds into words. In these sagas, funerals were never left aside. They told how a warrior was laid to rest, how a chieftain's pyre lit the sky, how a widow sang her grief into the night. These details gave the sagas weight, grounding legend in ritual. The funeral was proof of honor, a way of sealing a life's meaning with fire and song. Without it, the tale of a hero felt incomplete. The poets, the skalds, also carried these echoes. Their verses, memorized and recited for generations, often compared heroes to flames, ships, or mounds. A man might be remembered as the fire that burned against his foes, or the oak that stood until he was felled, now rooted in his mound. These images were not just poetry. They were drawn directly from the rites that every listener had seen. In this way, each funeral became not only a farewell but a spark for art, woven into the cultural fabric of the North. Travelers, too, brought echoes outward. Arabs, Byzantines, and chroniclers from distant lands wrote of what they had seen. Some described ship burials with awe, noting how Vikings gave treasures and slaves to the flames. Others spoke of chants, laments, and rituals that seemed both strange and majestic. These writings spread across Europe and beyond, shaping how the world remembered the Norse. To foreigners, the funeral rites became a symbol of the Vikings themselves, fierce, proud, and bound to fire and fate. Yet time softened the edges of these echoes. As Christianity spread across the north, the old rites were forbidden, the old fires dimmed. Church burials replaced ship pyres, crosses replaced carved stones. But memory does not vanish so easily. In villages and valleys, people still whispered of mounds where ancestors slept, of flames that carried souls skyward, of songs once sung under starlight. Even as they embraced new beliefs, the memory of the old ones lingered like embers under ash. Centuries later, when scholars rediscovered the sagas, those embers flared again. The funeral scenes within them stirred imagination, painting vivid pictures of longships aflame. Heroes sung into the night. Historians puzzled over the details. How accurate were the accounts? How much was legend, how much truth? Yet whether precise or poetic, the image was powerful enough to endure. In modern times, the echoes have grown louder still. The sight of a burning Viking ship has become a symbol known around the world. It appears in art, in films, in festivals, in the very language of farewell. To say someone had Viking funeral is to say they were honored with fire and grandeur, even if no ship ever burned. The image has become universal, transcending its original time and place, yet always pointing back to the Norse who first lit the flames. But the deepest echo may be more personal, for when we hear of these rites, we recognize something of ourselves. We, too, long to be remembered. We, too, seek meaning in death. We, too, use ritual, song, and gathering to make sense of loss. Though centuries divide us, the heart of the funeral, the desire to honor, to remember, to guide, remains unchanged. In this, the Viking rites speak across time, reminding us that grief and love are eternal companions, shared by all people in all ages. So the echoes continue. In sagas sung by Icelanders, in writings carried by travelers, in histories written by scholars, in films watched by modern eyes, and in the quiet hearts of all who hear the story. The fires may have gone out 1,000 years ago, but their glow is still with us, flickering softly in memory and imagination. The funeral was never only for the dead, it was for the living, and for those yet to come. Each pyre was a flame that cast its light far forward, across generations. And now, as we recall these rites, we too stand in that glow, hearing the echoes, feeling the warmth of fires long gone, yet never truly extinguished. The embers of memory still glow. The story has carried us far, from the first spark of a funeral flame, through chants and songs, through feasts, mounds and sagas, all the way to the echoes that linger even now. Yet as the journey draws to a close, we return not to some distant shore or forgotten battlefield, but to the quiet fire before us. For though the Vikings are long gone, their flames remain with us, in memory, in imagination, and in the simple truth that fire, once kindled, never truly dies. Imagine again the glow of embers. They shift and breathe, like living things, orange fading to red, red deepening to ash. A faint smoke curls upward, vanishing into the night. You sit before it, as men and women once did 1,000 years ago. You do not stand on the deck of a burning ship or beneath the shadow of a great mound. But the feeling is the same. You are part of the eternal circle, a witness to fire, memory, and silence. The Vikings believed that the fire carried the soul onward, whether to Valhalla, to Fólkvangr, or simply into the embrace of the ancestors. The flame was a bridge. Tonight, the fire is not just theirs, it is yours. As you breathe in slowly, you may feel that bridge within you, each breath a spark, each heartbeat a drum that has echoed since time began. The sagas tell us that memory is a kind of immortality. To be remembered is to live again, to walk in the mind of another. So even now, by recalling their rites, we give the Vikings life once more. The mothers who sang laments, the warriors who faced the flames, the children who watched the embers, they live in us for a moment. And perhaps, when someone remembers you, you too will live again in their quiet thoughts, their soft words, their whispered prayers. The eternal fire is not only flame but memory, not only ash but love, not only an ending but a passage into peace. Listen to the stillness now. Around the fire the night has grown deep. The stars have wheeled slowly overhead, ancient and unchanging. The flames are low, gentle, like the slow breathing of someone asleep. The air carries the faint scent of smoke and earth. You are not alone, for just as the Vikings sat in watchful silence, you too are a keeper of the fire, a guardian of memory. With each flicker, the world grows softer. With each sigh of wind, the past drifts further into dream. The chants are hushed, the songs fade into whispers, the sagas close like a book resting beside the hearth. What remains is quiet and warmth and peace. You are here by the fire, safe, held, drifting, as the Vikings once gave their loved ones to the flames. So now you give your thoughts, your burdens, your waking hours to rest. The eternal fire keeps them for you. It will burn on while you sleep, glowing gently in the night. Close your eyes and let the embers guide you. Feel the weight of the day ease, as if laid upon the pyre, offered to the flame. Feel yourself lighten, like smoke carried upward. You are part of something older than time, something endless, something eternal. The fire burns. The fire soothes. The fire watches. And as you drift now into sleep, the eternal fire will remain, glowing softly, silently, endlessly, within you. Rest now, the story is done. The flame is yours.